Okay, go ahead anytime.
Okay, this is Dr. Robert Morris. We're interviewing for Passing on the Pride. We're across the street from Pittman Center School at the Burnett Memorial Baptist Church. My name's Trisha Chambly, and I'm 14, and I go to Pittman Center School.
You cut it off.
Okay.
United Methodist.
Burnett Memorial United Methodist
Okay,
Church.
I'm going to say go and then wait about 2 seconds and then just look right in the camera.
Okay.
Okay.
This is Dr. Robert Morris. He is a longtime resident of Pittman Center. My name is Patricia Chambly, and I'm interviewing him for Passing on the Pride for our documentary. Today is April 18th, 2002, and we are at Burnett Memorial Methodist Church across the street from Pittman Center Elementary School.
Anytime you're ready.
Did you go to school to become a doctor?
Yes, I was a student at the old Pittman Center School. High school was located a short distance from here. Graduated in 1944.
When did you first become a doctor in the community?
Well, I graduated from medical school in 1953, and I practiced surgery in Knoxville, Tennessee for many years.
When you came to the Pittman community, what was the overall health of the community?
Well, when I was young, I was born a short distance from here, and back in those days, there were very primitive conditions. People that lived here sustained themselves with what I suppose you would call sustenance farming, grow their food and all their provisions on the land, which, as you can see, the topography means they worked hard on the hillsides to get their vegetables and so on. And at that time, there were no roads into this country and no electricity, and we operated much like the old stories that go with Abe Lincoln.
So you had no indoor plumbing or?
No indoor plumbing. The closest water was the creek, which was utilized in the summertime for bathing, swimming. Most of the water was obtained from spring water, springs that come out of the ground, and didn't have any refrigerators, no ice box. And usually what we'd do is build a little house across the spring, called it a spring house. And you set milk and things that you wanted to keep cool in the spring water.
Oh, neat. What about your meats and stuff? How did you keep those?
Most people, they would grow hogs and cows. And I remember when I was young, I used to hunt a lot, squirrels and so on like that. I became a squirrel hunter and fish. So you took some of the animals from the land and the fish from the rivers and creeks.
Did you have a market day or anything that you could go to, market day?
Yeah, there were small country stores, old-fashioned country stores where the produce would be on shelves, and they had the typical nail keg filled with nails, and most of them would have a checkerboard on it, and so it was kind of a meeting place in a way. And then we used to also have, coming through this country, what was called rolling stores. Merchant would obtain a truck, fill it with produce, come around through the country and stop and say, you need any salt or soda or whatever, you know. Those were called rolling stores, but they were small stores in the community.
Oh. Then the community, they had festivals and stuff? Were those put out by the church? The festivals?
Festivals. Yeah, the social activity, particularly for teenagers, was geared around the church. I can remember on Wednesday nights, the church would sponsor what they call socials, and the boys and girls would meet there and have fun, play games, and that was a social activity for the week. And then other activities related to the schools in times of school, sporting events, and in the summertime they would have a fair, FAIR, the old country county type fairs. And
there were rides and games and.
No, there weren't any rides. We made up our own games.
Did you go to the Pittman Center Elementary School or just the high school?
No, I went to smaller schools. Back in those days, they had one-room schools, and eight grades were taught in the school. And those schools, they had the typical pot-bellied stove, which was in which you placed wood to burn for the heat. Had one teacher that would teach all the different grades. And my father was a school teacher, so he moved around quite a bit. And I went to one-room schools in Sims School, that's down in Sevier County, up toward the Newport Highway. And then I went to Glades School, which is on the Glades tour here, and then Webb Creek Elementary School. That's about 4 or 5 miles up Webb Creek from here. And I graduated from one of those schools in the 8th grade.
Wow. When you became a doctor, you went to medical school. Which medical school did you say you went to?
I graduated from the University of Tennessee Medical College in Memphis.
Memphis. When you came to the community, did you have a doctor's office or?
Well, I practiced in Knoxville. I never did practice in this in this community. I was a surgeon specialist, and the physician up here at that time was Dr. Robert Thomas, who came here in about the mid-20s, and he's well known in this area. Robert Thomas Foundation. He was a physician as well as a minister, very intellectual guy, and one of the smartest guys and the most varied, educated guy that I ever had the pleasure of meeting. And he was the community or the local family type doctor.
So everybody went to him.
Yes, and there were other doctors. One out in Cosby, a Dr. Huff, and then there were physicians in Sevierville.
Did you have any children?
Yes, I had 3 children.
3 children.
Girl, boy, girl.
And how old are they?
Oh, hate to say. One's about 51, 48, and the other one's about 41 or so.
Oh,
and 4 grandchildren. One of them's your age.
And they don't go to school at Pittman Center either, do they?
No, I have a granddaughter that goes to school in Orlando, Florida, and my grandson goes to Webb, West Knoxville. Katie goes to Seymour, and Sam, he's 5 years old, so he's getting ready to go to school.
Oh. When you were in Pittman Center, when you first moved here, were there any big disasters or anything that changed the area?
So I lived here all my life till I graduated from high school. The only serious disaster was in 1938. That was a year that a tremendous amount of rain, and I think the remnants of a hurricane came into this area and probably had 10 or 12 inches of rainfall, coupled with all the wet weather we'd had all summer, and there was a flood that came through Pittman Center, came down Webb's Creek, and 8 people lost their lives in that flood. That's the only major disaster that I recall. It was interesting geologically. For years, you could look in the mountains, and in the hollows, you could see what we call blowouts, where the ground just looked like it erupted. Large trees uprooted, and these were all over the mountains. It took probably 20 years for the scars to heal.
Wow. From the tornado or the hurricane?
Well, from that particular rain, which was the remnants of a tornado. Of a hurricane, which came in off the Atlantic.
Oh, and whenever it flooded, were there a lot of houses destroyed?
Yeah, quite a few houses. The roads were destroyed, had bridges across the road, and the timbers, the trees, when the water washed them down, would lodge against the bridges, and they'd have these long 100 feet, 200, 300 feet of timbers just pushed against the bridge, and then the water from a dam that it created would cut through the roads and cut several of the roads like that.
Were you here when the bridge over in Emirates Cove was built?
Yes. That bridge in Emirates Cove's been there a long, long time, and then it just in recent years, they've added the covered bridge.
Yeah.
Yes, they used to swim there and dive off of it into the creek, river. I think that's one of the reasons they probably put it there, to keep the kids from doing that nowadays.
Yeah, a lot of people do that. They get in trouble for it too. Is there anything else that the people did in the community for entertainment, or?
No, most of the entertainment was church, and then for the young folks was so we'd have picnics and activities of that type, hikes and so on. But see, we didn't have television. Most did not have a radio, and that was pretty good. If you were a kid that liked to read, you entertained yourself with the reading.
Were there any board games or anything that you could play? Did you have board games?
No, we didn't. We didn't play those type of games in those days.
What types of games did you play?
Well, the old-fashioned games, when small kids, they used to play with marbles. You had to become an expert in shooting marbles, and there were several different games that you could play with that. That was the younger kids. And then other activities, pretty limited to what I've told you before on that. Some of the guys were talented musically, and they would play music, and so I get together in groups of them like that.
And they played just instruments, or were they singing?
Usually it was the typical mountain instruments like a guitar, banjo, fiddle, mandolin.
And they had at the socials there were dances, or
No dancing.
no dancing.
No, they didn't dance in those days. Just listen and play games. Spin the bottle. Did you ever hear spin the bottle?
Yeah.
Well, that was one.
Did they have the fall festival then, like they do now?
I beg your pardon?
The fall festival, like they do now over at the school?
Similar to that, yes.
Was it an all-day thing, or?
Yes, it was an all-day thing, and there'd be contests, and ladies who could make the prettiest pickles or bake the nicest pies, and they'd have a baby contest, the prettiest baby, and then usually some competitive sports racing and so on.
And why exactly did the fall festival start? Was it for the crops coming in, or?
Yeah, it's usually in the fall, and if I remember correctly, it's in the fall after school started. Back in those days, we would start school like in the latter part of July. You see.
And now we start it in September.
Yeah.
And must the students walk to school, or were there wagons?
Well, in the old days, I remember when I was very small, the high school here at Pittman, they had horses that drew a wagon. And then later on, they got school buses that would bring the children in from any distance on that. And here at Pittman, they had a dormitory where the girls would come and stay. They did not have one for the boys.
So the boys had to walk or ride the horse?
Yeah.
What kind of classes did they offer at the high school?
Well, the classes they offered were the basic classes. I grouped them in mathematics, science, history, English, and school was very strong in the basic subjects. And then there would be home and economics, shop for the boys, but the concentration was on the basic courses.
Who started the schools in Pittman Center?
Well, the school was started in the mid-20s, and Dr. John S. Burnett, who was a Methodist minister, he recognized the importance of education, and he started several schools in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee. I believe there's a total of 8. One of the schools was Pittman Center here. He solicited aid from a gentleman in Elmira, New York, called Dr. Pittman, and Elmira Church, Methodist Church there, sponsored this school here. And then he obtained building materials and built a high school here. And they would solicit books, gifts, and people would donate clothes. And they had a store down at the adjacent to the high school where they'd have used clothing, and they would bring in the clothing, put a little price on it, quarter, 50 cents. Now I look back on it and realize it's just letting them pay a little something, rather than call it a contribution or donation. And a little interesting story. When I graduated from college and started the medical school, I came by the clothing store one day, and they had the prettiest robin egg blue sport coat with a little enhancement on the shoulders to make the shoulders look a little larger. Real pretty coat. I said, I believe I'll buy that. So I bought it for $1. And when I went to Memphis, I had several friends. And when they'd want to go out on a date where they wanted to impress their girlfriend, they'd all come borrow my coat. My dollar coat.
Did you marry here, or?
No, in Memphis.
In Memphis?
Memphis, Tennessee. Might throw in this, interesting, this school here, when it was started, it was Dr. Thomas, who later became head of the school, and he was a physician at that time. And had a principal named Mr. Luther Flynn, who was very diligent in having a good school. And teachers that were teaching here, many of them came from the north, Pennsylvania, New York, other places. And these were people that were highly dedicated teaching. They did it because they wanted to do it. And consequently, we had some superior teachers in this school.
The teachers, they were from the north. Did they get paid to come, or?
They had some sustenance pay, but they weren't doing it for the money.
The school was small.
Yes, the school was small. My father was graduating, the first graduating class at Pittman. I think there were 3 in it. And then through the years, the graduating senior class would be probably 20 to 30, 35 people. And the year that I graduated is 1944 during World War II, and most of the boys dropped out of school and volunteered and went to the Army. And there were only 7 in my graduating class. But later on, I think it got up into the 30s on the senior level, which meant they had 180, 200, 250 kids.
Before you decided to become a doctor, did you have any other career choices?
Well, I was in the Army when I was young, 17, and I stayed in the Army for 4 years and was able to have a pretty good short-term career in that. I had the good fortune to be commissioned in the infantry, so I spent almost 4 years toward the end of World War II and spent 3 years in Germany subsequent to the war in the Army of Occupation. Then later on, I came back, finished my pre-medical training in college, graduated from medical school, and at that time, the military had some good opportunities for physicians to go into the military, particularly if you didn't have any money. And so I went back when I graduated and completed my internship. I agreed to go into the military, and they agreed to send me to professional residency training in surgery, which was for a period of 5 years, if I would agree to serve 3 years after that as payback time for it. So I spent over 8 years in the military as a surgeon, and finished that up in 1962. Came to Knoxville, practiced in Knoxville till I retired.
How many years did you practice in Knoxville?
In Knoxville from 1962 to about in the 90s, about approximately 30 years.
Wow. Did you enjoy what you were doing?
Oh yes, yeah. The kids that graduated from this high school here, I guess part of it was influenced by what other people had done for them. Many of them went into service type professions, lots of teachers, ministers, some engineers. I think there were 2 of us that went to medical school, but lots and lots of teachers. And some of them rose very high in the teaching profession. One fellow, I think, was superintendent of schools in a big school in Florida. Dr. Thomas's son, Laverne, went on and became a teacher in mathematics and headed the mathematics department for Syracuse University.
Wow.
So some very competent kids.
And they graduated from Pittman
Yes.
High School?
Yes.
Now the high school's joined, though. And when did that happen?
I think it was around 1960 it happened. And it's interesting. I've been following through the years Gatlinburg Pittman High School, and I was impressed with the number of National Merit Scholar finalists they have at Gatlinburg Pittman. And someone told me it was rated as the best public high school in the Southeast. And I was looking at the paper the other day for the pictures for the valedictorians, salutatorians and all 5 pictures from GP were National Merit Scholar finalists. And compare that with some of the larger schools in Knoxville, like say Farragut, I'm not sure, I don't think they had one. And I've noticed through the years that the two schools in this area that have the greatest intellectual accomplishment, scholastic accomplishment, is Gatlinburg-Pittman and Webb High School in Knoxville. Both of them have kids of that quality. Wow. So it speaks well for the school here.
Most of the kids come out of Gatlinburg, but we have some that come from Pittman because we're so small. Is the community bigger now than it was when it first started?
Oh yes, it's completely changed. Nothing like it used to be. And when old timers like me tell stories, everyone thinks, well, are you sure you're telling it right? I remember when I went to North Carolina State, and when I was 17, I got to go over there in the Army for a year before I became 18, going active duty. And most of the kids that I was with over there, they had us grouped in groups of 1,000, a battalion, and most of my classmates there were from along the eastern seaboard, and many of them very well-to-do, wealthy people. And they used to have a lot of fun with me because I had brogue from the mountains, you know. And so they'd say, now tell us about the mountains again. And I'd tell them, and they'd say, oh yeah, yeah. So all I had to do was tell the truth, but they couldn't see that type of living was going on at that time. So it was interesting, a lot of fun. I'll tell you funny. I had never seen any colored Kodachrome type pictures, you know, and 17-year-old boys, you know, I guess they do the same nowadays. We were in the military and we had a bunk, and the military permitted the boys to put up a pin-up. Do you know what a pin-up is? No. You don't know what a pin-up is? You'll have to talk to your teacher here then, but I'll tell you, a pin-up is a picture of a pretty girl, like a movie actress. Back in those days, it was Betty Grable, Lana Turner. They were the favorite pin-ups. And so the boys would put the big picture on the front of the bed, and so I would, over the bunk of the bed, and one day I was in there looking at those pictures, and I said, I wish I had me one of those pretty colored pin-ups. Well, that night, my roommate came in. When I came back from the study hall at night, I looked at my bed, and there was the prettiest pin-up you ever saw of Lena Horne. Now, Lena Horne was a favorite colored singer. I didn't take it down. I left it.
Did you have any sports, or was it just...
Yes, sports. Gatlinburg here, Gatlinburg and Pittman Center High School, they always had good athletes, and back then we had, even though we were a small school, one of the best basketball teams in the whole area, and a lot of the kids here went on to college and played basketball, and I played basketball in high school, and later on I played some baseball. Did some wrestling in college. I was on the wrestling team. So the boys here a lot of them were very athletic, and the girls were very good too. They were very athletic.
And were there separate teams? Were there guys' team and girls' team, or were they joined together?
No, they were separate teams. Yeah, they were separate. They had the girls' team and the boys' team. Usually when they'd play, they'd have two games. You know, girls, similar to what they do now, the girls and the boys. Back then, that was in the 40s, segregation, you know, was prevalent in the South, and And I remember we used to schedule Austin High School in Knoxville. That's a Negro school. And they had terrific basketball too. And we used to schedule them home and home series. We'd go down there and play them, and they'd come here and play us. And the greatest turnout would be at the Austin Pittman Center basketball game. And then later on, when the state took over, they stopped the schools from playing, the colored schools. But back when I grew up, we played colored school, which is interesting.
Do you win championships?
Oh yeah, they won several championships here. Yeah, but the basketball team did. The boys, they were very, very good.
When you first came to Pittman Center, were you here just traveling through, or did you come to settle?
No, I was born here.
You were.
Yeah, I was born about a mile up Webb Creek from here. And Dr. Thomas, he delivered me in the home in 1927. And he also delivered Dolly Parton, you know. And a little interesting story on that. The school here was sustained by donations, you know, and gifts. And Dr. Thomas was a good preacher. He was a good physician and a tremendous PR man, public relations. And he would go to churches, you know, and tell them about what was happening here in the mountains. And then those churches, they would make donations to him, and they'd donate clothes and donate books. We had a good library because of people that would donate that. And when I was in medical school in Memphis, he used to come to Memphis, and he would like to take a student, you know, out. So I was his representative, and of course he was getting full publicity out of the fact that I was going to medical school from up here, you know. So we go to the churches and down there, and in fact, it's interesting story is that he had one in the church down there, and there was an elderly lady was there, and when it was over with, she came up and said to me, said, "Would you come to tea on Sunday afternoon?" But, you know, we don't have teas in the mountains. So I go to tea, and she was pretty smart. She was a smart old lady. So she knew that young boys like to see pretty girls, you know, and vice versa. So she had told me to bring a friend, and when I went there, she had a couple of very pretty girls there. One of them was an airline stewardess, and then the other one was this pretty blonde girl, which I met and subsequently married. And I used to tell Dr. Thomas, I said, "Now, Dr. Thomas, I used to be up there pretty good on your list, but when Dolly was born," I said, "Dolly took over. Now I'm pushed aside." So he would promote Dolly.
So there weren't a lot of people that have actually there's people that became famous, but Dolly Parton probably.
Yeah, she was an entertainer. She was a very determined person, you know, and she was an example of knowing where she wanted to go and had the drive to get there. You see a lot of kids in school today. Some of them are very, very smart, and some of those do not have the drive to really take advantage of their talents. But when you get a smart kid with a lot of drive, that's what makes the world change.
How do you think our community's changed since when you first moved here?
Well, it's more like everywhere else in the country now, you know, all we have all the niceties here that people have anywhere. And that all happened in a very few years. And it's an example of what happens when you have good schools and kids get a good education. Educated people make things happen.
Well, I guess that's it, and thanks for coming and talking with us
Well, you're welcome.
to help us out. And
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
thank you.
So we may be related. We'll get the genealogy. Leonard Owenby. Now, do you know what his father's name?
Jackson Ownby.
Jack Owenby. Is it O-W-N-B-Y or O-W-E-N-B-Y?
OWNBY.
O-W-N-B-Y? Yeah, my mother was an Owenby. And yeah, we need to trace back. I can't remember a Jack. And yeah, we may wind up being kin folks. And he's in the landscape, is he?
Yeah.
Where does he work?
He was out on the main highway out on 321 close to Cobley Knob, but now he's in Sevierville and he's working from his home.
Oh, Click?
Yeah, Ownby and Click, that's it.
Huh?
Ownby and Click, yeah.
Owenby and Click.
That's it.
And, yeah, okay. Yeah, I know where it is up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so well, that's great. That's great.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, there were 6 in the family and 1 additional infant that died when he was 3 days or so old. 3 boys, 3 girls.
Did Dr. Thomas deliver them also?
He delivered some of them, but I don't know who delivered all of them exactly because I never did ask on that. But I know he delivered me, and he used to like to tell the tale is in a spring night, and the moon was shining. I'm sure he probably embellished it a little bit. And he said when he slapped me, I let out a wail that you could hear all over the valley. That's the way he would say it.
Did you have any chores at home when you were younger?
But when we were growing up, everybody had chores. You had to work. And we usually have a cow, milk, to get milk. And one of my jobs was to milk the cow, which I would do twice a day. And then we'd have hogs. You'd have to feed the hogs and feed the cow. And my other chore was to get in the firewood. And back in the late 20s, there was a blight that came through this country and killed all the chestnut trees. I mean, beautiful, big chestnut trees. And when the chestnut trees would die, you would look into the forest and you'd see this dead tree. And it turned out that old chestnut trees were great wood. So I used to go saw them down, saw them up, and split them into what you call stove wood. Now, stove wood is the wood that you use to cook with. And then you would get oak logs and burn them in the fireplace for heat. And the chestnut was very dry and it burned too fast for the fireplace, but it was great wood to cook meals on. And so I'd go collect all those old trees up, and then in the summertime we'd raise our food, gardens, and it grew a lot of tobacco. I never was very enthusiastic about the tobacco, but it was grown as a commercial crop. And truck farming here, beans, grew very well here. So in the summertime, when I was a kid, I'd stake me out 3 or 4 or 5 acres of beans, stick beans, and grow them and take them to Knoxville and sell them for income. Saved up a little money like that to go to school on. And So it was mostly that type of farming. And you worked all summer long. I mean, kids worked.
Yeah, we're rolling again.
Did the girls and the boys have separate chores? Were there certain chores?
Yes, see, most of the summer was spent growing food, which sustained you during the winter months. And kids, they'd pick berries, blackberries, raspberries, gooseberries, huckleberries, muscadine, and moms would make jelly out of it. And they'd can the berries, and then they would can vegetables, tomatoes, and et cetera, et cetera. And then potatoes, we grow potatoes. And interesting might be to you is that the way you keep the potatoes so that you could use them in the wintertime, you would dig a hole in the ground, and we had a lot of plants here called broom sage. So you pick this broom sage, which is kind of like a straw-like plant, and when it's dry, and you'd take the broom sage and line that hole in the ground about 6 inches thick, and then you'd put the potatoes in on that, and then you would take some more broom sage and cover it up, and then take dirt and build a mound of dirt over it, and then you dig your hole through where you could get your arm in and get the potatoes.
How old were you do you remember how old you were when the national park opened up?
The national park was dedicated in 1935. President Franklin Roosevelt made a trip to Newfound Gap and actually did the dedication ceremonies up there in 1935. Now the national park was Rockefeller donated money, and then the school children in the state of Tennessee, they collected monies, and so it was in the work for a long, long time. And of course the establishment of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park is directly responsible for all of the economic development that we have in this county, and its which basis, of course, is tourism, and that was all because of the park. Prior to the establishment of the park, a lot of the large lumber companies operated here, cutting timber, and they bought up a lot of the land, and I'm sure they probably made some concessions on, maybe even donated some land to the national park. But the establishment of the national park was the best thing that happened to this section of the country.
There's a lot of dispute over that because many people lost where they lived, and then.
Well, yes, see, people back in those days, they lived all the way to the top of these mountains, and it's hard for people that live in a quote level country to realize that, hey, you can farm in the mountains, So a lot of people were in the mountains here, and then when the park came in, some of them voluntarily sold to the park, and then others had their land taken by the right at the eminent domain, which we still have in existence now. And if the city wants a piece of land, they can condemn the land and get it. And the National Park made an agreement with some of the families where they could live there for their lifetime. But many of them sold their property and then went in adjacent counties and bought farms, which were far better for farming than up here.
The national park brought a lot of tourism, you said?
Yes, the national parks that's the reason that basic reason of why people started coming here was to come to visit the park. Then in recent years, there have been attractions like Dollywood and water parks and facilities like that. But basically, the tourist industry started here because people wanted to come to see the national park. And today, I'd say probably 50% of the people that come because of the national park.
Were there any other famous people besides the president and the Rockefellers that came to the park?
I don't recall any specifically. I'm sure a lot of famous people have visited the park, but in the establishment of the park, it was quite an honor at that time to have it dedicated by the President of the United States.
Newfound Gap, is that, where exactly is it?
Newfound Gap, it's go to Gatlinburg and go toward Cherokee, North Carolina. It's at the top of the mountain where the Tennessee and North Carolina state line occurs. And there's plaques and evidence of the dedication ceremony at Newfound Gap.
Were there a lot of people at the dedication ceremony?
Yes, I've seen old pictures. There were quite a few people there.
Were you in this area when it was dedicated?
Yes, that was in 1935. I was 8 years old. I can remember, I remember the occasion. I didn't go up there, but I remember the occasion when it was done.
How did the school children raise money for the
they'd have little projects, and they'd put their pennies in, and it was quite a deal for the state of Tennessee. In fact, I think they raised quite a bit of money just through the solicitation of the school children, which was good. I mean, that's good to have.
How many schools were in this area at the time the national park opened up?
Well, there were you would say 3 high schools. Cosby, which is adjacent to the park, and Cosby, Gatlinburg, and Pittman Center were the high schools. Then there were many small one-room schools scattered about. There was many of those.
Were there any in the park?
When the park took over and moved people out, while of course the schools moved out with them, yes, there were schools in the park. In fact, the first school that my father ever taught was in Greenbrier, which is, where Greenbrier up the river there. In Greenbrier, the first school he ever taught was in Greenbrier, but there were other small one-room schools around.
The schools moved when the park moved?
Yes, when the people moved out. When the people moved out, then the schools did not exist there anymore. They closed them.
Was the education level the same now, or is it set higher?
No, it's higher now. It's higher now. And early on, not many of the children went on to college, and they started going to college when they got to high school here at Pittman Center. And then a goodly number went on to higher education, a lot of them into professional schools and postgraduate degrees and so on. But prior to that time, no, people had a grade school education, and then they work on the farms, and usually a manual type labor.
Did any of your brothers and sisters go on to college?
Yes, I had 2 sisters that graduated from college. Both of them were teachers, and then one brother that made a career in the Navy and retired from the Navy, and he did not go to college. And then my older sister did not go to college. 3 of us did, and 3 of us didn't.
Well, I guess that's about it now.
Yeah. Okay.
So thanks again for coming.
You're welcome.
You guys did great. Yes, you did.
I'll give her a hug.
I know, but actually, we should have done that. I didn't think about that either.
Yeah, she's got it going.